If we are to pass the torch of liberty to the next generation, we must do as Ronald Reagan said.
They call their policy accommodation, and they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. All who oppose them are indicted as warmongers. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. Not an easy answer, but simple. If you and I have the courage to tell our elected officials that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right, we cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? When Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. Our founding fathers here in this country brought about the only true revolution that has ever taken place in man's history. Every other revolution simply exchanged one set of rulers for another set of rulers. But only here did that little band of men, so advanced beyond their time that the world has never seen their like since, evolve the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. Thank you.
Before we can understand what makes America great, we must discover the foundation that gave our founding fathers the strength and determination to fight for the belief that each of us have within ourselves the God-given right and ability to determine our own destiny. So let's travel back to Plymouth, Massachusetts. Sitting atop a hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts, is the largest freestanding solid granite monument in the world. For something so big, it is strangely little known, even to the people that live in the neighborhood surrounding it. The statue stands 81 feet tall and took 30 years to complete. The cornerstone was laid on August 2nd, 1859, and construction was completed in October of 1888. It was officially dedicated on August 1st, 1889. From this view, you can see that there's a gravel road that encircles the monument. But there's no parking lot, no gift shop, because the monument has largely been forgotten. Why is that? Let's look a little closer. When you stand facing the monument, you can see the forest that has grown up behind the statue. When you are standing behind the monument, you see the monument is facing Plymouth Harbor, where the Pilgrims first set foot on this great continent, and also looking towards Plymouth, England, from which they came. As you begin to walk toward the monument, you cannot fully comprehend the enormity and majesty you're about to behold. What is the story behind this monument, now known as the National Monument to the Forefathers? It was made as a tribute to the Pilgrims who came to the shores of Plymouth and laid a sure foundation for this nation on the holy word of God. My son and I went to Plymouth, Massachusetts to see this monument on the National Day of Prayer in 2022. If you look very close, you can see just how large this monument is when you compare it to my son and I as we stand at the base of the monument. Kirk Cameron has done a magnificent documentary called Monumental, In Search of America's Hidden Treasure, in which he tells this story much better than I can. He also shares condensed versions in the Biblical Citizenship course, as well as the American Campfire Revival. However, before we look at the current state of affairs for our children, I want to review a condensed version of this story. All stories begin at the top of the page, so let us start at the top of the monument, where a 36-foot tall sculpture named Faith stands on top of the monument, pointing to the heavens with one hand to signify faith in our Creator as the beginning of knowledge, while holding a well-read Geneva Bible in her other hand. It's significant that she should be holding the Geneva Bible because that's the very Bible that the Pilgrims brought with them when they first landed on the shores of this great continent. Directly below Faith is a plaque that reads, National Monument to the Forefathers, erected by a grateful people in remembrance of their labors, sacrifices, and sufferings for the cause of civil and religious freedom. The first fruits of faith is a changed heart. The first statue to the right is named Morality. She's a woman sitting with her eyes closed, looking inward because morality comes from within. She's holding a stone tablet containing the 10 Commandments of God. The small relief on her left is the prophet who warns us of impending doom. And on her left is the evangelist who shares the gospel of Christ and the hope of victory through Christ. And we are nothing without Christ, and then we must share that with others. In front of her is a relief that depicts the Pilgrims as they begin embarking upon the Mayflower to leave to start a new life for their families. The next statue to the right is Law, who is sitting directly under the Geneva Bible in the hands of Faith, to signify that all good and proper laws must align with God's holy word. The small relief on his left is Justice. She's holding a scale and wearing a blindfold because biblical justice is to be blind and equally applied to all people. The small relief on the right of Law is Mercy, a man holding his hands open, showing that true biblical law knows when to show mercy. The relief below law is the signing of the Pilgrim Wampanoag Peace Treaty. The next statue to the right is education. She is holding the Bible and pointing to the words as if she is teaching. The Bible says we are to teach the next generation at all times. The small relief on her left is youth, which shows a woman guiding her child. The small relief on her right is wisdom, which is an elderly man with the globe on one side and the Bible on the other side, showing he has a biblical worldview that he is passing on to the next generation. The relief below education is the signing of the Mayflower Compact, where they declared the purpose of their journey was for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. The last statue is Liberty. The Liberty Man is sitting facing the ocean as if he intends to protect the liberty of the new nation from the tyranny they had escaped. The Liberty Man is clothed in the armor of God, sitting on the hide of tyranny whom he has slain. The chains he has broken that once imprisoned him are around his ankle and his hand. On his left is a relief of tyranny with the foot of Liberty Man on his neck. The relief on his right is peace, a woman standing by a cornucopia basket that represents prosperity that comes through Christ. The plaque below the feet of Liberty shows the landing of the Pilgrims. On the back of the monument is the most important inscription, which comes from the journal of the second governor of Plymouth Plantation, which reads, "Thus out of small beginnings greater things have been produced by his hand that made all things of nothing, and gives being to all things that are. And as one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled hath shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Let the glorious name of Jehovah have all the praise." Governor William Bradford. Knowing they had been blown off course, were in an unknown territory, and many among them were not like-minded, the men on the Mayflower wrote and signed the Mayflower Compact before stepping onto the shores of Plymouth. In the Mayflower Compact, they said they had undertaken this voyage for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, yet modern textbooks do not teach this fact. Our true American Christian history confirms our Pilgrim forefathers and foremothers laid the cornerstone of our nation and true liberty upon Jesus Christ. For in the Bible that they read, that they carried across that vast ocean, we read in 2 Corinthians 3:17, "Now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." Never assume it is too late to restore that which the moths have eaten. God's people have had a great awakening more than once, and they can do it again. We must have faith built upon the whole counsel of God contained in the Holy Scriptures, and stand united to go forth into battle, knowing victory belongs to the Lord. Yes, this is the perfect recipe for that liberty that comes through Christ, but our enemy knows that recipe also. And quietly and subtly, bit by bit, they have been tearing down these strongholds, and we have passively allowed that to happen. We need to wake up and understand this is a spiritual battle, and we need to put on the full armor of God and go forth in his victory. 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu wrote this classic book of military strategy based on Chinese warfare and military thought. Since that time, all levels of military have used the teaching of Sun Tzu, and others have used it in politics, business, and everyday life. The Art of War is a book that can be used to gain advantage over your opponents in elections, the boardroom, and the battlefield. These are some of the most famous quotes from his book. Appear weak when you're strong and strong when you're weak. But I think the most important one is the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That is exactly what has happened to us. They have taken all of the areas in our lives that are most important quietly, bit by bit, and we haven't even noticed. And as they have done this, they've corrupted our nation and begun to take away our liberties. And we can do that also, that we can turn the table. But first, and here's another important point that Sun Tzu said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I would say that is the vast majority of people in America, and why they so easily give in to these uh, behaviors and the onslaught that has come across our nation. They don't even really know themselves because they've not been taught to understand the human mind based on the whole Word of God, who clearly says there's nothing new under the sun. So, first, we have to teach one another how we can remember who we are in Christ, but then we need to know the enemy. We must know ourselves and our enemy if we want to save this great nation. In 1963, 45 communist goals taken from the Naked Communist were read into the Congressional Record of the United States of America. You should get a copy of these and study them all, but let's just review a few of them here today, because these are things they planned back in 1963 that we can clearly see have worked out today. They've used court decisions to weaken American institutions, claiming that they violate civil rights. They've gotten control of the schools, the educational system. They have control of student newspapers. They have been fomenting riots since the 60s. They infiltrated the press, the radio, television, and motion pictures. They discredit American culture by degrading artistic expression, tearing down beautiful sculptures, and replacing them with ugly, repulsive, meaningless art. They eliminate laws that govern obscenity, calling it a violation of free speech. They break down cultural standards of morality, promote pornography, obscenity in the books and magazines and entertainment industries. They present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. We're even trying to make pedophilia legal now. They have infiltrated our churches. They've replaced revealed religion with social religion. Let's go to church and be entertained and make the people feel good. They discredit the Bible. They say it's not the infallible word of God. It's just a crutch people use to feel safe. They have effectively eliminated prayer or religious expression in our schools, saying that it violates the separation of church and state, which in and of itself is a lie. There was never a separation of church and state. That's a quote out of Thomas Jefferson's letter. And in context, it never meant that you couldn't have religious things related to political things. It actually, right after he wrote the letter, he went to church right there on the Capitol. They have discredited the American Constitution, calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step. They discredit the founding fathers as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man, when most of them were just common men. Some of them couldn't even afford a suit to go to Congress. They belittle American culture. They discourage the teaching of the true American history. They support socialist movements to centralize control over the culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, and mental health. They infiltrated and gained power of the unions and big businesses. They took power from the police, and now they're trying to give it to the social workers. They have discredited the family unit, encouraged promiscuity and easy divorce. They emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of their parents. In fact, they even blame the parents for all of the children's problems. And here's a big one for me. Jimmy Carter accomplished this. He gave away the Panama Canal, and it was actually one of the communist goals to internationalize the Panama Canal. And now China has control of the most important waterway on the face of the globe. The first thing we need to know about our enemy is what is their target. The children are our future. History shows the hand that rocks the cradle rocks the nation. Tyrants have always gone for the youth before trying to overtake a nation,
And now our schools want the children from the cradle to the grave. They have child care that in some schools will take care of them as young as 1 or 2 months old. The children are being taught to hate their fellow man, their country, and themselves. If the hopes and dreams of the children are destroyed, what kind of world will they grow up in? Will they return to the dark ages of ignorance and tyranny? What plan does the current administration have? Hillary Clinton wrote a book called It Takes a Village. I don't think it takes a village. I think it takes a family. So who is rocking the cradle right now? Let's start at the top and take a look at the current executive branch of our American government. The 46th President of the United States of America was interviewed by a trans activist known as Dylan Mulvaney. He has been sharing his days of girlhood as he transitions from a man into a girl on TikTok. This trans activist has become famous on TikTok with the younger generation. He put together a professionally choreographed video to share with the president. In this video, he wandered around a park and went into stores wearing a soft, feminine dress, narrating and sharing many different videos he had posted on TikTok. We won't watch his video, but we will review a few stages of this influencer's life to understand how he has been influencing the children on TikTok. Dylan posted a TikTok video every single day up till his interview with the president. The president sat and watched the video compilation of these daily posts beginning on the first day Dylan began his transition into a girl. Here's Dylan on day 166. Dylan strolled around town in this soft, flowing, beautiful, feminine dress, posing in many thoughtful and carefully planned moments to narrate the film for the president. And here was one of the final scenes. Once the video was complete, Dylan began his interview and he asked the president questions about how he could make life better for those who are in transition from one gender to another. In this conversation, the president said that people were just afraid of things they didn't understand. And then he affirmed that he approves of the sexual mutilation of our children by saying it is immoral for a state or anyone else to prevent or not allow gender-affirming care for children. Dylan has a great impact on the young generation, so let's learn a little bit more about him. After his visit with the president, Dylan had facial reconstruction surgery to craft his face to look like his idol, which is Audrey Hepburn. So here you can see the before picture compared to the after surgery picture when he came out to reveal his new face. Almost every public school teenager can tell you who Dylan Mulvaney is. Dylan has become a great TikTok influencer. He's very popular and has a great following, so they threw him a birthday party for his 365th day of girlhood when he became a 1-year-old girl. Here you see the promotional pictures that they took to promote the event next to the information about the Trevor Project, who was the recipient of the proceeds from the event. The Trevor Project is an organization aimed at transitioning young people. This event was streamed live from New York City's iconic Rainbow Room at the Rockefeller Center. At this beautiful gala, Dylan came out and he sang and he danced as if he was the star of My Fair Lady, and he entertained a large audience until a man with a beard in an evening gown played host of the dating game. Dylan interviewed 3 eligible men and supposedly picked out his first date as a 1-year-old girl. So after his visit with Dylan, the 46th President of the United States went on The Daily Show, and here he said that it is close to sinful to prevent children from having this kind of gender-affirming care. Now, just in case we're not convinced that the president is supporting mutilating our children, let's look a little farther into this. He doubled down on the idea of sexual mutilation of children when Tennessee passed a bill to prohibit
this gender affirming care for children. The Biden Department of Justice sued Tennessee in an effort to stop them from implementing this new law. The federal government won because a state Supreme Court said it was a violation of free speech. Children should be free to express themselves as the gender they believe they are. If that's not enough to convince you, our current administration supports and encourages the sterilization of our children through the sexual mutilation that comes with this gender affirming care. You should look a little closer to those that he is appointing to represent us at the federal level.
He appointed the first trans woman 4-star admiral in U.S. history, Dr. Rachel Levine, as the Assistant Secretary of Health. This trans woman says they plan to see this kind of health care for children normalized in the near future. Here in this picture, you can see this trans woman admiral and our ex-Deputy Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy, Sam Britton, as they represented America at the French Embassy for a Bastille Day reception. So this is the perception we're giving other nations of our administration. As the current administration celebrated Pride Month, it boasted of an array of officials in its ranks who represent historic firsts in their respective positions, boasting that 15% of all appointees identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Just to name a few, Pete Buttigieg, the first openly gay Senate-confirmed cabinet secretary in the U.S. history, took 2 months of paternity leave when he and his husband adopted twins. Despite there being a serious supply chain issue and train crashes and people were not getting basic necessities, he refused to return to work. Then we have Karine Jean-Pierre, in her words, the first black gay immigrant female press secretary who lies consistently, can't even tell her lies without reading her notes. Ben LaBolt, first openly gay White House communications director. Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health. Chantilly Wong, the first lesbian and gay person of color to be confirmed as an ambassador serving the administration for the Asian Development Bank. Sean Skelly, highest-ranking openly transgender Pentagon official and the second transgender person to be confirmed by the Senate in 2021. Brenda Fulton, serving as the Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs. There's been a slew of federal judges nominated, 2 openly LGBTQ women to serve as federal court judges in Beth Robinson and Allison Nathan. And then we have Judge Charlotte Sweeney, nominated as the first openly LGBTQ district judge court to serve in the U.S. District Court for the District of Colorado. Another thing he did in celebration of the Pride Month, this administration invited this 18-year-old boy who led a walkout at a Florida high school in opposition to the falsely proclaimed Don't Say Gay bill. So we don't want them, or Florida does not want teachers to teach children in the 3rd and 4th grade about sexual matters, and they decide they're going to label that as a Don't Say Gay bill and protest and disagree. Well, this young man, he's a good example on both sides of the podium, I suppose, because he took a special moment during his speech to thank his 5th grade teacher, his male teacher, who helped him come out as gay in the 5th grade. I think that's a very good example of why we don't want them talking about these matters at school. So if we weren't sure this administration was aiming at our children and that they have nefarious intent for our children, the White House published this video right after the Pride event saying, "These are our kids. They're no one else's kids. They're all our kids. And our children are the kite strings that hold our national ambitions aloft. LGBTQI plus Americans, especially children, are loved, are heard, and this administration has your back." The White House.
And then the president said during this celebration, "These are the bravest, most inspiring people I have ever known," as he walked among them and introduced himself to this trans woman. And then a few minutes later, this trans woman and a trans man both went to show their wonderful transformation by going topless. And the man shook his new boobies next to a woman that has cut off her breasts and been taking testosterone long enough to develop male characteristics to show off the wonderful things that medical intervention can do to change one's life, though they will never have a good life. But this crowd, the largest crowd ever seen at the White House for a Pride Day celebration, chanted 4 more years for this administration to continue. Oh, let's take a look at how the White House was decorated during Easter, Veterans Day, Christmas, and Pride Month. Oh, wait, that's right. It wasn't decorated for any of those events except for Pride Month. And just like Senator Scott Wiener said, we can't forget about the Sisters of Indulgence as they are welcomed into the White House. In a little while, we're going to talk about that group and Senator Scott Wiener a little bit more. But wait a minute. Let's find out what Rachel Levine is teaching the teachers about this child sex change situation we find ourselves in. He is teaching the teachers it's medically necessary, safe, and effective to do these things to our children. If you don't believe me, listen to his own words.
Gender-affirming care is medically necessary, safe, and effective for transgender and non-binary youth and adults. Those who attack our LGBTQI plus community are driven by an agenda that has nothing to do with science and medicine. These are politically and ideologically motivated attacks, again, on trans youth, and they are contrary to the overwhelming science and evidence. So we all have to stand up. We have to stand up and advocate and take a stand on behalf of those who are being harmed in many states across the country.
Okay, so everyone thinks it's a conspiracy that the teachers are trading tips on how to quietly transition children without telling their parents and skirting around the Republican gender laws. Well, here is a workshop that was fueled by and funded by the federal government. They were able to secretly record this event that they held online where all of the teachers were sharing their different tricks of the trade, how to do this subversively and quietly without telling their parents. So, what is this gender affirming care everyone's talking about, and why are parents allowing it to happen? Okay, so let's start over here with this little flyer that they hand out to the adults. They lie to the parents and tell them 72% of them, if you just support them and encourage them and allow them to transition, that they're going to have a better life. 72% have a better life satisfaction. 64% report having a higher self-esteem. 70% have claimed that they have a very good or excellent mental health situation. And 0% have housing problems. Only 23% suffered depression, and 4%, only 4%, attempted suicide. Well, all of those things have been proven false. In fact, the suicide rate of the transgender youth hovers around 50%, regardless of how their cases are handled, unless their proper mental health is dealt with correctly. Because all of the gender dysphoria has comorbidity. They have other problems that are not being addressed because they focus instead on the gender affirming care. They want them to transition legally by changing their name on their driver's license, their birth certificates, and their medical records. And then before that, though, they want them to transition socially so that they can use the right pronouns and change to a different name, and the clothing that they wear and how they express themselves, which gender they express themselves in. Then they convinced them to transition medically by taking all of these different kinds of drugs, the puberty blockers and the opposite gender hormones of different types. Awful medications that all have proven negative side effects and long-term effects, some of which never reverse. And then they can convince them, once they get them that far, they can convince them to transition surgically where their bodies are mutilated. Girls have their breasts cut off, get complete mastectomies, they get hysterectomies, and then they use skin from their forearms and their thighs to create a false male appendage. And the boys, they take and they cut their manhood into pieces and turn it wrong side out and try to create a false orifice that must be dilated every day for the rest of their life, or it will close up because it's an open wound. And neither the girls or the boys will ever have a healthy physical relationship with someone that they love after this, and they will never have children of their own after these things are done to their bodies. So they've been mutilated for life, and they can never be truly a boy or a girl again. They can never have a good, strong, healthy relationship with someone they love. And they become permanent medical patients for the rest of their lives. But they want us to believe it's safe and effective and medically necessary. Here is an analysis you can see at Reuters.com that's based on an analysis drawn from health insurance claims for about 330 million U.S. patients over the 5 years from 2017 to 2021. Here you can see the amount of pre-puberty children that have been placed on puberty blockers has increased from 633 to 1,390, and you can see the largest jump is in the year 2021. From 2017 to 2021, the amount of post-puberty children that have been placed on hormone therapy has gone from 1,905 to 4,231. And again, the biggest jump being in 2021. And the diagnosis of this gender dysphoria in children ages 6 to 17 have increased from 15,172 to 42,167, with the biggest jump being in 2021. Huge jump in 2021. Now you got to ask yourself, why is there such an increase in our children thinking they are the wrong gender? This did not happen by accident. But now the ultimate goal is gender-affirming medical treatment. And this is many children's hospitals refuse to do these things because they require that they be adults before they can have these procedures, because they're irreversible and carry a heightened risk of complications, especially in children. But there are some hospitals, and there's increasingly a higher number of hospitals who will perform these surgeries. In this analysis of insurance claims, they found that 56 boys had genital surgeries between the ages of 13 and 17. And the girls, there were a whopping 776 mastectomies performed in the United States just in 3 years. And none of these numbers include anything that was paid for out of pocket. These are solely based on insurance claims. In this analysis, Massachusetts and Washington include data for children 0 to 17 years of age, whereas California, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania only include the data for 9 up to 17 years of age. And as you can see, each and every one of these states have a steady increase in the number of children that are being diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Overall, this analysis found that at least 121,882 children between the ages of 6 and 17 were diagnosed with gender dysphoria between 2017 and 2021. Reuters found similar trends when it requested the state-level data on diagnosis from children covered by Medicaid. the public insurance program for lower income families. So you can see right here, even in these charts, that 1, 2, 3, 4 out of these 6 charts show a sharp turn in 2021. California's just been a steady increase each year. Doesn't seem to have any signs of slowing down there. I wonder what's different in that state.
One question often asked is, do trans kids stay trans when they grow up? What happens if we just let them be kids and love them as they are and refuse to affirm their transition with pronouns or a new name? 11 studies that covered 489 children who had displayed traits of the opposite gender starting in 1972 found that 20% of the children grew up to be transgender or cross-dressers, 12% grew up to become gay, and 68% grew up to become straight. Only a few had lingering doubts about their gender. Think about it. 331 out of 489 accepted who they were at birth just because their families loved them through puberty and did not affirm
As
the
you can see
dysphoria
by this study
by
of
using pronouns
139
or letting the
participants,
child
only
change their
17
name.
were classified as persistent and remained in the transitioning, but 122 of them desisted and became normal, well-adjusted young people that were able to go on and live a normal, happy, healthy life.
In fact, study after study confirms that if you love the children through the dysphoria, they overcome and begin to accept themselves as they are. Affirmation sends them to the next level using puberty blockers and hormones, which means even less children overcome the dysphoria and are often driven right into the arms of the medical industrial complex to become lifetime patients and physically unable to return to their biological gender. Puberty and teenage years are awful for everyone, but love is stronger than hormones. Traumatic events often trigger gender dysphoria, so we need to love and accept children who have experienced trauma even more without the use of pronouns and name changing. Testimony after testimony of the young people who have realized they were tricked into transformation all say the same thing. The only thing affirmation provided them was the confidence that they had made the right decision because their loved ones wanted them to be the opposite
So, where
gender.
did this philosophy come
So they
from?
were convinced
There
they
are
had
many
to
other
take the next
sources, but the
step.
trans agenda was primarily begun by pedophilic psychologists, degenerate quacks, lunatic sexologists, literal Nazi scientists, and other assorted deviants. A collection of the most despicable monsters imaginable came up with all of this stuff. Here are 5 names that you should know: John Money, Alfred Kinsey, Volker Sisquash, Magnus Hirschfeld, and Erwin Gorband. All of these men had different roles that they played, one of which was a horrible Nazi scientist doing all sorts of experiments upon all sorts of people, and most of his patients died. Yet his work was cataloged and is still in use today. John Money, he is got the story that is most heartbreaking. A set of twin boys were born. One boy was injured during this when he was having his circumcision. He was injured so badly that his parents sought out John Money for his advice, and he told them that they should raise him as a little girl. So one was treated like a girl and the other twin was treated like a boy, and they were taken to John Money as their psychologist, and he experimented on them. They did alter the little boy's body to make him think he was a girl, and this psychologist did all kinds of psychological torture upon these children as they were growing up. He documented all of this in a book, and that book is still read today as if it were a successful experiment of being able to raise a child as a girl when he was really a boy and having a good outcome. Only problem is it wasn't a good outcome. The one that was raised as a boy died of a young drug overdose because of all of the awful things that John Money had him do and experience with his brother that was raised as a girl. And the one that was raised as a girl soon found out that he was actually a boy and that his parents had lied to him his whole life. And then he started going around speaking publicly, trying to tell the world all of the horrific things that John Money had done to him as he and his brother were growing up. And when they didn't really believe him and they didn't take him serious, he sat down in his car in a parking lot and put a shotgun in his mouth and took his own life. This is not what I would call a successful experiment. But these are the men that they follow in the footsteps of to do these things to our children today.
Children all across the globe are under attack. Hundreds and even thousands of them are sold into some form of slavery almost every day. If that is not enough, we now have a medical establishment that has begun sexual experimentation on them in an attempt to alter their gender, leaving them sterile and perpetually in need of medical care. There is no way to return to who they once were, so they go on to become adults that never properly function as either gender. Let's sum this up so you can see, hear, and feel the logic behind the consequences of this gender-affirming care. Girls can never become a boy, and boys can never become a girl. Based on the testimonies of the young girls now suing the counselors, hospitals, and doctors that did these things to them, as well as the adult victims of this barbaric mutilation that are now speaking out, these experimental surgeries result in lifelong infections, phantom pains, headaches, a shortened life, and other side effects that almost always leave the person sterile. Most of those that have gone through with these drugs and surgical processes will never enjoy normal sexual relations for the rest of their lives. If they decide it was a mistake, there is no way for them to be whole again. To develop male characteristics, the girls must take cross-sex hormones. If she keeps her vagina, these drugs cause the lining to thin and tear if she tries to have intercourse, and they often deal with incontinence after being on these drugs. If she goes for the fake male appendage, the problems are multiplied, and it only lasts 5 years before it must be replaced. So much anger has been fomented within the LGBTQ community that they have taken to the streets in support of the trans community, saying anyone who wants to stop the sexual mutilation of children is trying to commit some kind of genocide. They claim that not allowing gender-affirming care will kill the children. This phenomenon has grown so fast that individual states across the nation had approximately 100 bills in the 2021-2022 legislative session regarding protecting the rights and liberties of LGBTQ community members. But suddenly, in the 2022-2023 session, states had almost 500 bills trying to stop the LGBT community from forcing their agenda upon the youth of America, or taking rights away from parents, employees, and business owners who now have their own civil rights being violated by these activists. States like Tennessee, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Florida had protests against trying to stop the sexual mutilation of children. In Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas, the activists entered and occupied the Capitol buildings while the legislatures were in session. How could such a thing become so prevalent, going from a few children to hundreds of children almost overnight? What would drive well-meaning people to overrun our state capitals and hold protests all around the country to support doing these awful things to our children and accuse those who want to protect the children of trying to kill them? Well, bit by bit, quietly and subtly,
You think
they
we're
infiltrated the
sinful?
schools and churches
You
with
fight
activist
against
teachers.
our rights. You
Think
say
it's
we
just a
all lead
conspiracy?
lives you can't
Listen to their own
respect.
words.
But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked? Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. You can keep them from disco, warn about San Francisco, make him wear pleated pants, we don't care. We'll convert your children and make an ally of you yet. We'll make an ally of you yet. We'll make an ally of you yet.
So, bit by bit and subtly, they converted our teachers into activists so that now our children walk into their classrooms and see displays like this. There's an organization called Libs of TikToks, which is a single woman who watches for posts that go on TikTok revealing what the teachers and other liberal activists are exposing our children to. So I'm never going to go on TikTok, so I'm very thankful that she has dedicated herself to that. And we're going to go through just a few random examples of things that are going on in schools across our nation. So this elementary school in Vancouver put on their own Pride Parade where they had the elementary students prance through their neighborhood carrying Pride signs and Pride decor that they created at school in projects so that they could support the LGBTQ community. This elementary school in Long Beach, California held a drag show for their students with a star that is a man that sells sex toys on Instagram. In Colorado, this children's hospital has a pride display and a library full of transgender books and a big poster supporting the LGBTQ community. The mayor of Hoboken, New Jersey, along with other elected officials, joined together to go to the public library to offer a drag show and a banned book readathon so that the children can get prizes for reading books that have been banned. And they want to criticize us for banning books. Well, let's take a quick look at what is being banned. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not going to show you pornographic images. I'm not going to show you something that I wouldn't want you to read or my children to read, because these are just pictures from 4 of the banned books, and I'm not even going to say their names because they're even just as bad as the content. They're so pornographic I've got to blur them out, but they have these books with these drawings clearly showing the acts that they're describing right there on the shelves. And when someone wants to have them removed from the school, they're not banning them from libraries, they're just banning them from schoolrooms and school libraries. But here are the books that they're supporting, and all of these teachers are actively supporting and encouraging the children to read these books because they've been banned. Now we think our libraries are safe, but here's a display of the kind of sexual gender books they have in the openings of all of the children's sections in libraries all across our nation. Now, here are 2 different teachers. The first one is a teacher celebrating Pride Month with her students in Miami in defiance of Governor DeSantis' bill saying 3rd and 4th graders should not be taught about sex. The second one is a teacher at a school board meeting in Glendale, California, explaining children as young as 3 can know they are transgender. Let's let her speak for herself.
With queer and trans youth in large groups. And so I deal with a lot of their trauma related to the heteronormative, Judeo-Christian, patriarchal, imperialist, capitalist system that oppresses them. And so, why critical race theory? I'm not just here in support of our LGBTQ youth, it's all connected. I'm in support of critical race theory and diversity, inclusion, equity training, because White people participated, for example, in the largest social welfare program in the history of the United States, and yet now they throw their hands up in the air when we look at our housing crisis. And Armenians talk about the genocide, but they received SSI, but they don't want to talk about the indigenous genocide of 1850 and the lack of reparations for Black and indigenous people in this country. And they don't want to talk about how dare you, as marginalized people, come here and you don't want to talk about the oppressed trans youth who, your kids aren't even learning what they need to learn in this. That 1 in 2 will attempt suicide, and 95% know that they are trans when they are 3, 4, and 5 years old.
This is a book given to students
Yes,
in an elementary
children
school
as
in
young as 3
Olympia,
years old know
promoting
that they
puberty
are
blockers, the use
transgender.
of pronouns that include tree and z. And so it goes through all of the tools that you will need while you're going through puberty, so you don't want to go through puberty. And then over here you have a whole wheel of the different pronouns that you can choose from. A school in Massachusetts has this display up to promote the books such as Flamer, which contain pornographic content. Flamer was on that blurred out picture we looked at a few minutes ago. But they've got the covers of all these banned books on their board, and this is what they're encouraging their teenagers to read.
The first ad here is from an Oregon school district who held a Pride Fest for all ages, which included a drag show and the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir, who we heard sing a few minutes ago. The second image is a sign that was hanging in the hallway of a K-8 Sawyer School advertising a pride parade
featuring
and drag
pens and
performance
books
for
about
kids
gender
as young as
identity
5
and
years
unusual
old.
pronouns. Lyman High School in Florida included a guide to gender, sexuality, and pronouns in their high school yearbook. The first picture here is an author of LGBTQ books for children. In this video, she's explaining how teachers can skirt the law and help their students transition without their parents' knowledge. The second picture is of a drag queen who performs for children and says he will push drag so deep into the education system that your kids won't be able to get into college unless they know how to pull together a lucan to work it out at a brunch. I don't know what those words mean. Across the nation, we have a few people that are fighting for the rights to protect their children from this secret trans agenda going on across their country. Jeff Younger in Dallas is not on this map because his battle has been going on for a few years, and it started in divorce court. He had a set of twin boys. His wife began transitioning one of them as a toddler, and he's been fighting and losing for about 7 years. We will probably talk about him again later. However, it has come to my attention that school counselors across America have been taught how to encourage children to transition secretly, and Texas has actually made that easier because these counselors do not have to tell the parents anything that they don't write down. It's time for Texas parents to start fighting against the secret trans counseling going on right here in Texas schools. Let's talk about some state laws. Jeff Younger has been directly impacted by this particular state law passed in California. They passed a law that makes it possible for them to remove children from a parent who will not allow them to transition. And the Dallas courts allowed his wife to take their twin sons into California when that law passed, and Texas passed laws to stop the mutilation of children. And oddly enough, the senator behind this bill is none other than that Senator Scott Wiener, who personally welcomed the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence into the White House. And you can see here that his normal appearance when he's not in the Senate is a little bit revealing of the character of that man. Another bill Scott Wiener has sponsored will give California the ability to emancipate 12-year-olds if they want to transition and their parents will not agree to it. So, exactly who are these Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence that Scott Wiener is so fond of? In San Francisco, these drag queens, known as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, hold this event they call the Hunky Jesus Contest every Easter Sunday in a park across the street from the city's oldest Catholic school. And this event is advertised on television as fun for the whole family, and people bring their children to this big display of debauchery. You can see that they defile the cross by pole dancing on it, and it gets worse. As well as having the drag queen pole dance, now they have one pole dance on a man that's hanging on a cross. The church has become a mockery, and the Dodgers invited these awful men to perform in honor of Pride Month at the stadium. Because of an uproar from the fans, as well as the activists, they changed their mind multiple times. At one point, they wanted to have a religious service to try to please both groups of people. As you can see from the results, it was not a very successful day for the Dodgers. They had the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, but they also had an almost empty stadium. However, outside was a different story entirely. 3,000 Catholics, and it included a few other activists, were outside and protesting against this event where they honored the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Peacefully, of course. In New York City, their Pride March was a drag march, and they were chanting that we are coming for your children. You think I'm exaggerating? Okay, so we've talked about what's happening across the nation. We've defined what gender affirming care is. So, what's happening right here at home in Texas? The Senate and House have both been working on a dozen or so bills trying to stop the sexual mutilation of our children, help with the medical needs of those who have been sexually mutilated as children, protecting the children from social transitioning, from being exposed to sexually explicit drag shows, and much more. Most of the bills failed because the Speaker of the House supporting Democrat chairs who are opposed to this effort. However, the good news is that two very important bills passed. One expected to stop the sexual mutilation of our children under the age of 18, and the other to protect them from sexually explicit drag shows. And I believe there was also another one that banned sexually explicit books in our schools. Sadly, a few Democrat counties have already said they're not going to enforce these laws. In this picture, you can see up in the balcony a lot of people in red shirts that are the grassroots activists that are supporting our legislation to protect the Texas children. But sadly, they were not alone. During some of the hearings, the drag queens and other educational people and what have you, they came and they spoke against the bills. In this case, this drag queen introduced himself as an example of how clean-cut and safe drag performances are. However, in the smaller pictures, you see that he returned with a different look and participated in overrunning the Capitol. When being escorted out of the balcony area, he bent over and showed his rear and genitals to the legislators. He posted on Twitter, he's livid. He can't even show up to the Capitol now to fight for his community because they'll arrest him because they're calling this indecent exposure. And I didn't even consent to having my picture taken. And he wasn't alone. Down in the lobby, multiple women who call themselves reverends held a vigil and sang hymns invoking the name of God, trying to stop the bills to protect our children, so that the sexual mutilation of Texas children could continue. You see here this Reverend Aaron Walter turned activist is leading the vigil. She even brought her child to participate in the protest. Here we have Reverend Carol Johnson, Reverend Mary Wilson, and Ricardo Martinez. Now, he's got a great story. He is the CEO of Equality Texas. He has connections with 150 organizations across Texas so that in a minute he can call them up and rally them together to come and to support issues and arrive at the Capitol to overrun the Capitol, to have riots, protests, whatever, immediately. And he managed to get 3,000 people to show up at the Capitol for this event. Democrat Representative Sean Theory walked across the aisle and showed great courage as she went against her party to speak in support of SB 14. After going into great depth to explain the effects of those medical treatments on children, she talked about her constituents wanting her to vote for this legislation led to horrific threats of attacks being made against her, and then said, well, maybe I should let you listen to her yourself. It's a pretty long clip, but it's worth listening to.
As a legislative body in this state, both Democrats and Republicans alike have routinely enacted legislation which shields children from acts which place them at an increased risk of harm. This principle is established in many areas of public health policy, such as restricting the age to 18 for tattoo services in this state, restricting the age to 18 to get a tan at a tanning salon, raising the age to 21 to purchase tobacco, cigarettes, and e-cigarettes. These policies and regulations are in place because we recognize that children should be protected from actions and activities which have harmful health risks or lifelong consequences. This same logic must also apply when approaching the very complex issue of treating gender and body dysphoria in children. As we heard here today, right now in the United States, there is not one universal policy or standard of care on the appropriate age that cross-sex hormones should be administered in children experiencing gender dysphoria. In fact, there is significant divergence amongst both the medical and scientific community. One of the key aspects of this debate is the use of drugs, which delay a female child from menstruating, or a biological male child from physically maturing into his adolescence. Puberty is a natural biological process, as it serves a critical role in both the physical and mental development in all human beings. Concerns have been raised that hormonal suppression of puberty may permanently alter a child's neurodevelopment. It is only honest to admit and accept that we do not know of the long-term effects that prescribing GnRH analogs, cross-sex hormones, as young as 8, 9, and 10 years old, of what that will do to children, solely for the purpose of affirming gender dysphoria. What we do know is that these drugs can cause harm to a child's health, including the early onset of osteoporosis, incontinence, increased risk of blood clotting, stroke, and heart attack, infertility, and sterility. Moreover, as we all agree, the decision to undergo body-altering surgery to remove healthy breast tissue in biological females or to remove male genitalia in biological males cannot be reversed. While these surgeries should happen after the age of 18, there is no such law codifying that in Texas without the passage of SB 14. Science has already proven that the frontal lobe section of children's brains are not fully developed under the age of 18. As Democrats, we've espoused this principle many times on the race the age to 18 for criminal culpability. The data on teenage brain development has shown that because the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, is responsible for decision-making, planning, and thinking about the consequences of actions, teenagers rely more on another part of the brain, the portion of the brain that unduly influences their emotions, impulses, aggression, and instinctive behavior. Certainly, children as young as 8, 9, or 10 are completely incapable of understanding that these medical treatments may require that they remain patients for the rest of their lives. For example, What are the long-term effects of administering the chemotherapy prostate cancer drug and chemical castration drug known as Lupron to a child who is otherwise physically healthy but is experiencing gender dysphoria? Just last year, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration added a warning to the drugs known as puberty blockers. It indicated that there is a plausible association between puberty blockers and pseudotumor cerebri. This condition occurs when the pressure inside the skull spontaneously increases. This can cause brain swelling, severe headaches, nausea, double vision, and even permanent vision loss, according to the Mayo Clinic. Earlier this year, the American College of Cardiology released a study finding that people with gender dysphoria and taking hormone replacements as part of their affirmation therapy face a substantially increased risk of serious cardiac events, including stroke, heart attack, and pulmonary embolism. There's also literature that suggests that long-term use of estrogen and testosterone in children may cause polycystic ovarian syndrome. Despite talking points to the contrary, the data is inconsistent that the rates of suicide and depression will be improved by administering these hormones. Lastly, several European countries, which were on the forefront of administering this treatment, have reversed course. They are taking a more cautious approach now to the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in minors. Finland now recommends psychotherapy as the first-line treatment for gender dysphoric youth. The Swedish Health Authority no longer offers puberty blockers to minors except in exceptional cases, stating the risk of puberty-suppressing treatment with GnRH analogs and gender-affirming hormonal treatment currently outweighs the possible benefits. Certainly, the topic of gender and body dysphoria in children requires careful consideration, caution, and compassion. Sadly, the discussion has become polarized and politicized. In fact, while many of my constituents encouraged me to vote in favor of this legislation, hostile activists on social media platforms have made horrific, nasty political threats to influence my vote against the bill. These personal and often racist attacks on me as an African-American woman are neither productive nor persuasive. Privately, some have shared in confidence that they agree with the bill, but they are too afraid of the retribution. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So it remains my legislative duty and my moral obligation to vote the conscience and core values of my constituency. I will do this today with an open heart and a clear mind. As a thoughtful legislator, mother, woman of faith, and child advocate, I am making a decision to place the safety and well-being of all young people over the comfort of political expediency. It is my core belief and conclusion that we should remain consistent in the premise that children must be given special provisions under the law, as they cannot fully appreciate the long-term consequences of their actions. As such, the best practice should be to raise the age to 18 for gender modification. Moving forward with this prudent policy, we should also ensure that vulnerable children and teenagers have quality access to mental health care that is safe and in a supportive environment. Only by taking a careful, compassionate, and evidence-based approach to this issue can we guarantee that we are doing what is truly in the best interest of our children. Thank you.
Texas Scorecard keeps us informed about what's going on around the state of Texas. Let's rush through a few headlines just to get an example of some of the things they've been reporting on this year. Texas public universities offer minors in LGBTQ studies. A Texas biology professor was allegedly fired for teaching sex is determined by XY chromosomes. Anti-Sex Offender Registry Association meets in Houston. Now, this is a group that wants to do away with the sex offender registry because they want to call pedophiles minor attracted persons. Abortion organization opened up a pop-up shop in Bastrop. So we can pass out abortion pills since they can't have regular abortions in abortion clinics. There's another article somewhere where Abbott was even invited to come visit this little pop-up clinic that moves around the state. Tyler Public Library keeps sexually explicit book available for minors. So what happened there was that a group asked them to remove some sexual books from the children's department, and they removed one but left the other. Another one, TCU's drag queen class, has taken place since 2021. Kempner, promoting LGBT agenda with drag-themed festivals, included many drag shows and drag queen story hours, all targeting children. In Keller ISD, they were previewing policies to counter this transgender ideology about bathrooms and pronoun policies in the schools, and they were getting complaints and arguing with the LGBTQ advocates and the ACLU of Texas. Fort Worth mayor ends controversial program encouraging kids to read LGBTQ books. She claims she had no knowledge of it, but they had actually created a badge for children that were reading these LGBTQ books, and so she had that removed so that these books were no longer being promoted in the summer reading program. And then over in in the HEB school district, a precinct chair discovered more than 20 sexually explicit books in the junior high libraries that were being made available to children as young as the age of 11. Now, a lot of those will get covered by this new law that was passed in Texas, but not all of them. A local teacher saw that was what was happening in the schools about the books and the counseling. She actually took a course to become a school counselor, and then she discovered that they were supposed to encourage the children to transition, even right here in Texas. As a result, she resigned as being a teacher and began looking at library books to find the source of this ideology that was taking over the schools. And so she's created this great website. She doesn't want recognition for her work. She just wants to continue her research, and so she posts everything that she finds at this website. And these are all local books here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. These are local schools and local districts that she is researching. So you can look at her website at the blog. It's done like a blog. She just adds an article as she comes across something. She just puts another article up there. So here's a few of the books that we've learned about so far. George was published in 2015. It's a story of a boy who is anatomically a boy but knows he's a girl. It starts with this 10-year-old boy hiding in the bathroom reading magazines that girls enjoy, and he feels like he must hide because his parents, it's going to be really hard to tell his parents that he's really a girl. And then you have Meet Cute Diary, which was published in 21. It's a collection of trans fantasies about a trans boy afraid to step out of the closet to find his own happily ever after, and it includes descriptive sexual desires as well as events that he experiences. I'm calling him a he, but he's really a girl, so if I get my pronouns confused, I'm very sorry. In Transmission, which was published in 2019, it says, your gender is how you feel in your head as opposed to what's between your legs. Alex is an ordinary teenager that was born female and has been living as a male for the past few years and recently started the physical transition. This book will step other teenagers through the process as a heartwarming coming-of-age memoir. The Feminist Agenda was published in 2020, and it has extremely explicit sexual encounters described in detail and will teach you how to fight for the patriarchy, even though you might be a part of it yourself, or fight against the patriarchy. Excuse me. Running with Scissors was published in 2002, and it's the memoirs of Augustine Burroughs, and these are true stories of a boy whose mother gave him away to be raised by her unorthodox psychiatrist. It includes graphic descriptions of sexual encounters with a pedophile and other horrific tales of abuse and neglect, with extremely dark humor, as if that life was a good life that he lived. Thankfully, many of these books, even though they're in the Dallas-Fort Worth libraries, they'll be covered because they are so sexually explicit. They'll be covered by the law. But sadly, some areas, some school districts, some counties are not going to apply these laws, and so these books are going to stay in the libraries unless the people, adults, parents, stand up, pay attention, and get involved.
Even more concerning is the fact that these books will probably not be covered by the new law because they are not sexual in nature. They are meant to teach very young children that they might be born in the wrong body. When Aiden Became a Brother was published in 2019. Aiden didn't feel like a girl because she was really a
Calvin
boy,
was published
so
in
she cut
2021.
all of her hair off.
And in
It was
that
hard
one,
to tell the
parents
parents, but
child
even
that
harder
they love
not
them,
to tell
even
them.
if they're
It
whether
took a
they're a
while
girl
to
or a
adjust,
boy or neither
but they
or
learned
both.
from
And
other families
later,
with
Dad
transgender
told the
kids.
child the word for how the child was feeling was transgender. In I Am Jazz, which was published in 2014, a little boy explains he has a girl brain but a boy body, and it's called transgender. Then he says, I was born this way. Now, don't forget, these are the books in our schools, okay? So, in this one, It Feels Good to Be Yourself, which was published in 2019, it explains the idea of non binary, cisgender, and transgender, then explains that when you're born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt, so they looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. In My Rainbow, which was published in 2020, the child says, I don't think you understand, Mom. I am a transgender girl. So Mom listens to him and makes him a rainbow-colored wig. Little People, Big Dreams is a best-selling series of books and educational games that explore the lives of outstanding people, from designers and artists to scientists and activists. All of them achieved incredible things, yet each began life as a child with a dream. This empowering series offers inspiring messages to children of all ages in a range of formats. The board books are told in simple sentences, perfect for reading aloud to babies and toddlers. The hardcover versions present expanded stories for beginning readers. Boxed gift sets allow you to collect a selection of books by theme: paper dolls, learning cards, matching games, and other fun learning tools provide even more ways to make the lives of these role models accessible to children. This book that is portrayed here on these pages is the story of the success of RuPaul, explaining that he feels just as confident as a woman as he does as a man. They fill our school libraries and public libraries with these awful books, then send in the drag queens to read to the children. Many people thought it was safe and the libraries were just having a bit of fun acting out and joking with the children with someone like Mrs. Doubtfire, but it turns out that was not what was going on. Over 40 deeply concerned Catholics gathered outside the convention center in Fort Worth on April 25th of 2022 to prayerfully protest the Texas Library Association's annual conference that featured a drag queen story time. The keynote speaker at the after-hours session in Fort Worth was Alyssa Edwards, also known as Justin Johnson, whom the program described as a drag performer and television personality. Edwards' speech was aimed at teaching the librarians how to establish a drag queen story hour at every library. This was followed by a drag queen story time featuring a self-styled drag queen, Miss Jenna Sky, who read to the attendees. Seems the Catholic Church is on the front lines a lot quicker than the rest of us. Make no mistake, these are not Mrs. Doubtfire. These are the kinds of men that are reading to our children. For years we have let this go on without paying any attention and have not said or done anything about it. It turns out This is not safe, after all. Look at the men. Look how they're dressed. Look how they're holding their children. They're caricatures of women, and they are not safe. Here are just a few headlines I ran into about drag queens from Drag Queen Story Hour turning out to be pedophiles. That's why they want to change them from pedophiles to being minor attracted people and remove the sex offender registration. All right, so we've covered schools and education and the books that they're having our children read, the public libraries. Now let's get into some entertainment. Disneyland has this After Dark event for Pride Month where they're going to have a special Pride Night where they can bring children as young as 3 years old for $139 per guest to come after dark to Disneyland. And then right here in Arlington, Texas, they have a Pride event that's being advertised for children, hosted by and presented by the Help Center and being supported by the city of Arlington in one of their buildings. Last year, this same event in Arlington was held in the Arlington Museum of Art. They dressed as Disney characters singing favorite Disney songs, and they say they keep it PG for the children, but the undercover reporters who've gotten into these events disagree. In fact, right next door in Dallas, they've been hosting this Pride event at the state fairgrounds for 40 years. There's so many events at this that they have to publish a full-color magazine to tell the whole story. The organizations that will benefit from this event include the Coalition for Aging, the LGBT, and Elevated Quality, ASD, and Dallas Hope. They have a 7-hour event that is specifically for teenagers aged 13 to 19. In this teen portion, they started with 40 attendees the very first year, and they now, as of 2022, had 15,000 teens who attended. Now, I'm not sure what the number was in 2023, but I do have some pictures of what went on in 2023. As you can see from the booths, what they were selling, it was even inappropriate. Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence were there handing out little trinkets of some sort to the little children, and they had buttons with inappropriate slogans. They had t-shirts with inappropriate slogans. They had fans that were extremely inappropriate. But then you have this little grandma sitting there selling Disney pictures. But then when you look a little closer at these Disney characters, they're all doing things that are inappropriate. And the adults that are attending are dressed inappropriate. But this is a huge event for the city of Dallas, done yearly, done every year. And we wonder why Dallas has gone so far left. Here are a lot of the people that support this event, and they've contributed money or supplies, displays, or booths. All right, so let's move over to Denton, and they're going to use the public pool to have a all genders, all ages LGBT event where they can all use the same changing room. So you can have an old man and a little girl in the same restroom or the same changing room. Sure that nothing could happen or go wrong with the setup like that. So there's a group of people that were starting to get very concerned about these family-friendly drag events, and they had no idea and been going on so long, and they had no idea what exactly was going on inside. So they started in 2020, they started dressing up to go in as undercover reporters and get some pictures of what's going on so that they could report on it. Most of the videos that they've taken in these events is too explicit to share with you and inappropriate. So I just picked out a couple of pictures here and there that give you an idea of what's going on. For instance, here you have a man dressed as a woman that had just finished a sexual dance taking a tip from a child. And other dancers took tips from the children that they had to stick inside their costumes, like men do in a striptease bar. And most of the behavior is much like a man's bar, gentleman's club, late at night. Children should not be exposed to. Over here on the other side, you see this man dressed as a woman taking this little girl up and down the runway, teaching her how to strut her stuff. And then each of the other drag queens picked out a child that they strutted up and down the runway with, all looking at this sign saying it's not going to lick itself. Well, the next event that I heard about was this bingo event where a man with a beard dressed like a woman acknowledged there were small children present, but said, "I still have to give my toast that I always give." And he said, "A toast to me and those who lick us where we pee. A toast to you and those who lick us where we poo." And it gets worse. In Florida, for the 8th consecutive year, Murray and Peter have presented a Drag Queen Christmas. It's billed as a family-friendly event all across the nation. They have multiple events across Texas, including right here in Grand Prairie. They performed simulated sex acts on stage with animals, exposed naked fake breasts to hundreds of people, with all of the children separated from their parents gathered together in the front rows so they could interact with the drag queens. These videos were some of the most disgusting videos I've seen, and entirely too inappropriate to share with anyone. Couldn't even find individual pictures to share. Because of activists like these groups that have gone undercover to report what's going on, they have decided that children will no longer be allowed to attend their Christmas events starting next year. Now, the other photo was also in Florida. A drag queen Christmas event that happens in Florida every year. And this picture shows the snow person simulating an abortion on stage. They unzipped the tummy and a large red chunk fell out on the floor, and they picked it up and fed it to the little elves who snuck up behind the snow person to share in the moment. Then after that, the snow person threw some of it into the audience. It turned out to be baloney. This event was supposed to happen at the local college campus, but the college got so much bad feedback they canceled the show. Performers decided to move it to a park in Amarillo where they could be seen from the playground. Families that did not intend to be there were being exposed to the material. There were several very inappropriate acts, but this picture tells you all you need to know. It shows a child walking through the crowd with a bucket collecting tips for the drag person on stage that just did a complete strip-tease act wearing a tan bodysuit underneath so they would not be officially naked. This family-friendly event was hosted at Tulips in Fort Worth, and it got the attention of the Tarrant County Judge, Tim O'Hare. He started an investigation into the establishment and its license as a result of the activities that took place here. The main reason was that this man, who was acting as the moderator, sat down in a chair on the stage in front of the little children, wearing no undergarments, causing his private parts to be exposed. At this same event, Tara Wilson was introduced as running for the city council in Fort Worth. She says she is a queer woman on the board of LGBTQ Saves, which is an organization that is also aimed at Texas youth. She says she is fighting for their right to continue having these drag shows. So here's another event that took place in Fort Worth, and you'll see this one's handled a lot different than the events in Dallas, because these pictures are taken from video that's provided by the Fort Worth police. You see, undercover reporters can't get in anymore because they've started hiring these Antifa-looking people to guard the doorway to pay attention to the people that are coming in. and they're making sure that the undercover reporters can't get in. So the police are watching them because of all the things that are going on, and they decided they were going to go across the street to confront a group of people that were praying peacefully. You see, across the street there were Catholics praying for the families and children that were attending the drag event. And these men dressed as Antifa, using their umbrellas as shields, came over and approached the small group of people as they were praying. And as the men praying turned to see what they wanted, they walked over. As the men walked over to speak with them, everything seemed peaceful, and then suddenly the young man in the back reached between the two umbrellas and pepper sprayed the men who had been praying. Everyone scattered, and the men got the women to safety. Thankfully, the Fort Worth police were quick to respond, and there were 3 arrests made that day. So let's contrast Fort Worth with Dallas. The Dallas Express got a hold of a story where the city of Dallas requires employees to undergo mandatory transgender re-education training at taxpayers' expense whenever a co-worker chooses to transition to a different gender, according to the internal documents. The protocol refers to the training as being mandatory a total of 5 times. For those who might have personal or religious objections, the city of Dallas says it's not required that you believe in or accept an individual's right to be transgender or undergo a gender transition. Employees are entitled to their beliefs, but we are all required to treat the transitioning employee and all employees with equity and respect. The protocol continues: if an employee refuses to use the pronouns or feels uncomfortable doing so, he or she risks being reprimanded or even terminated. During a very inspiring Bible Life study at the New Beginnings Church in Bedford, Pastor Larry Hutch, Constable Jason Bedford, our County Sheriff Bill Wayburn, and Pastor Troy Jackson sat around a table discussing the devastating conditions surrounding human trafficking and the children left behind from a broken system and broken families. Sheriff Wayburn told about rescuing 22 victims of human trafficking in Fort Worth that were being kept in animal cages inside the home. He continued to explain that over 80% of child trafficking in America are the children that have been left behind in our foster care system. Right here in Tarrant County, we have hundreds of children that need homes, and he wants to know, where are the Christian families that have homes and hearts full of God's love that they could share? Well, the church has been infiltrated. Let's just take a look at what's going on in the church. Well, actually, I should say in buildings that call themselves a church. The first ad you see here is the advertisement for the event we looked at that happened in Dallas, where the sign said, "It's not going to lick itself." That event was held to raise money for an organization they do not name, but it was aimed at helping LGBTQ children. The second ad is where we want to start this section. It's for an event held at a church in Katy, Texas, intended to raise money for their transparent closet. An undercover reporter went into that closet, located in the back of the church, and found it was used to give children the clothing items they needed to transform into the opposite gender without the knowledge of their parents. He was recording the conversation on video, but was quickly removed when Pastor Amanda realized he was recording. The undercover recording that he had was not very clear and easy to see, so I went to their website and discovered that they actually advertise their transparent closet at a website so children will know where they're located and be able to find them. So you can see here they actually advertise that they offer these things, and they were having that bingo night with the drag queens so that they could raise money to stock that transparent closet. So let's go to the Grace Avenue United Methodist Church in Frisco, where they advertised a gay pride block party. At this event, they had all sorts of tables and things
set out front in front of the church and handed out sexual reading material and stickers to the children. The event even included furries, and they had a whole lot of balloons and things out there so that the children would be very attracted to this event. Here's another family-friendly drag event that was hosted by Faith Church in New Braunfels, Texas, raising money for local nonprofits that are not named. One of the drag queens that they invited specializes in demonic characters. Here you can see all the supporters that came out to that church to support their effort of having these drag queens come in to entertain the children. And in the back you can see that there were a handful of protesters that were opposing it. Here's another event advertised as an annual community event for the city of Carrollton, hosted by the Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church. As you can see in these pictures from last year, the pastor stood with the members of the church in a booth set up to register voters on a table filled with LGBT paraphernalia. Buttons saying things like, "Don't make me use my daddy voice," "Love has no gender," "He, him," "Hello, I'm she, her," "My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard," and I'm like, "Go away, I'm gay." I don't really understand all this, but those are the kinds of things that they think they should promote at this church. The third largest denomination in America has ordained Ms. Pentecost as the first trans woman Methodist pastor. Here you can see him in an article discussing a poem he wrote in which he said, "Queerness is divine and God is nothing." In the top center photo, you see him preaching in his own church. The top right photo, where he's wearing angel wings, is from an article where he discussed his ordination. The bottom right picture is from where he visited a children's ministry in Florida, and that pastor used Miss Pentecost as an example of how we are to transform ourselves daily. Here we see a drag queen strutting down the aisle of Episcopalian Church High School auditorium, further emphasizing how they are using libraries, public schools, private schools, and churches to target the children. James O'Keefe has paid a citizen journalist $1,000 for this recording they obtained from a Catholic university who is going to allow a trans girl to room in the girls' dorm without their knowledge.
Would she be able to dorm with women?
Yes.
Which is the cheapest?
So in this instance, we would consider this an accommodation and would charge the double room rate.
And that's the cheapest?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you charge less because she's transgender?
It looked like you had the Pride Network too, so you prioritize transgender and lesbian, gay, bi.
Yeah.
University of St. Thomas.
Hi, I just called and I spoke with a girl about my trans sister dorming at the university.
James O'Keefe here, OMG News. We have our first citizen journalist that went out, bought her own camera, and delivered her own story, and we're going to give her $1,000 for it. Now, this citizen journalist in Minnesota came to us with recordings of conservative and religious universities of her calling and asking if her trans sister could dorm with the girls, and they would not tell them.
So you've had transgender students come here before?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, and you haven't told the other. Wow, that's great. Now, why? Just out of curiosity, why don't you tell the other students? Would there be a big uproar?
Probably. I think here at St. Thomas there would be a mix of response.
Because of the Christian Catholic.
Right.
And the conservative kind of.
Yeah.
So they would get upset.
Often probably actually their parents. I think part of that would be weird if we were like, "Hey, look, this is what's going on here." Oh. And so I think that's partially what would be an uproar, like, why are you letting that happen?
And the other concern we have is that the other girls won't know, right?
Unless she shares, right? Like, we never will give that information.
Would the other roommate know that she's transgender? Would that be kept confidential?
Yes, if you want to keep it confidential, then we will keep it confidential.
So would she be able to like room with on the female floors, like with cisgender females?
Yes. If she identifies as female, then she is able to room with the female side.
This citizen journalist used tactics that are important to use to discover what people are doing in private versus what they say they're doing in public. After securing the meeting with the head of residence life at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, this citizen journalist, alongside one of our own, went ahead and did what yields the best results.
Would she be able to room with dorm with women?
Yes.
So she can request to live with a girl,
Mm-hmm.
and that roommate wouldn't know, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Most of our students want single rooms, and we only have so many.
How many do you have?
We only have like 4 of these with the bathroom inside.
Which is the cheapest?
So in this instance, we would consider this an accommodation and would charge the double room rate.
And that's the cheapest?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you charge less because she's transgender? Obviously, we think transgender person should have preference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the truth that you uphold that here?
Yeah, I think it's part of just like, how can we set this student up for success?
Is there like a waiting list for those rooms?
We do our housing assignments in July, and so we will look at all of the different requests before.
She would hopefully go to the top based on her. She would?
Yeah.
She would go to the top because of her identity?
Yes.
And it helps you close Pandora's box.
A little bit.
It's really great that this one's being inclusive.
Yeah, we're trying. Like, how can we move that direction?
Without being too public?
Yeah, unfortunately.
We know there are dozens of more university officials who will probably say and do the same thing if they're in a meeting with a citizen journalist. So who's next? Which citizen wants to be a copycat and do what it is this person in Minnesota did? Get the camera, schedule a meeting, and make it happen. This story was what I call OMG worthy. OMG was able to pay this person $1,000 after they sent us the recording. And we want to pay a lot of people $1,000. So send us your footage. If it's OMG worthy, we'll produce it and we will air it.
When James O'Keefe was Veritas, he uncovered a story that's very hard to hear. This is just a small segment from the Undercover Report to give you an idea of what kind of people are taking over our educational system. This is from a private Christian education system that charges a lot of money for tuition.
Meet Joe Bruno, Dean of Students at the prestigious Francis W. Parker Private School in Chicago, which happens to charge $40,000 per student.
They're just like passing around dildos, butt plugs. The kids are just playing with them. They're like, how does this butt plug work? How does this work? That's a really cool part of my job.
Parents might be stunned to learn that Bruno's version of love and acceptance means handing out sex toys to underage students.
So I've been the dean for 4 years. During Pride, we do a Pride Week every year, and I had our LGBTQ plus health center come in. They were passing around butt plugs and dildos to my students, talking about queer sex, using lube versus using spit.
So now it's summertime and we have a whole new phenomenon. From New Hampshire to California, overnight summer camps for transgender children as young as 4 years old are cropping up all over the United States, with many operating from secret locations where counselors reinforce the campers' gender dysphoria with voice training, makeup sessions, and other trans-centered activities. So Planned Parenthood here in Texas has decided that since it can't have abortions, they're going to hold puberty parties for 4th and 5th graders during the summer to help them understand why they want to take puberty blockers instead of going through puberty.
We need to return to the basics and start with faith, the kind of faith that produces morality and laws that are just and merciful. We need to restore families and get parents back in charge of the education of their children. Not so long ago I was fighting for school choice, but now I just want the entire to bring down the entire system and go back to the little red schoolhouse where the teacher was paid and housed by the parents. 2020 resulted in many little pod schools popping up all across the nation, and that is the direction we should go. If we work together, we can help one another educate the children. One-parent families or families where both parents must work can still be in charge of the education of their children. We just need to remember, it doesn't take a village, it takes a family. This is a spiritual battle between good and evil. God has called us to be on the offensive, not the defensive. In the art of war, we were taught that we must know our enemy and ourselves. I've introduced you to some of our enemies right here in our own communities. Now we need to get to know ourselves and what we are made of. The enemy knows that teaching the rising generation is where the power is. Public schools have access to the majority of our children for the majority of the day, and we now know what they're teaching them. The target has always been the children. Every despot in the history of the world has always gone after the children. The 1963 Communist Manifesto said for them to destroy morality. The monument to our founding fathers teaches us the formula for building a strong nation. That same formula has been used and turned against us to tear down our once great nation, but it's not too late. We can restore that which the moths have eaten. The Bible teaches us that we are to teach the children the commands of God diligently, as we sit in our houses, as we walk by the way, as we lie down, and when we rise up. Every time you hear something is bad for our democracy, oh, don't do that, that's going to destroy our democracy, you need to remind them that America was never a democracy. We have always been a republic. It could be said that America was a Christian constitutional federal republic from the very beginning. Christian because all source documents can be traced back to the Bible as the primary source. All of the authors that quoted the Bible. Without Christ, there would have not been an America as we have known it. Constitutional because we have a written constitution that was intended to guarantee our rights and put government in place to protect our rights. Federal because we united to allow the federal government to have limited powers, the powers that would oversee us as a nation, but not the powers that would divide us as individual states. A republic because we have representation that speaks for us at every level of government. We have representatives we send to the federal level, representatives we send to the state level, representatives we send to the community level. No matter how you interpret our founding, our U.S. Constitution, as well as our Texas Constitution, guarantees that we will have a republic. John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. America was built with a biblical view of government. It all began with self-governing individuals who governed their families and served their local community, and the federal government had almost nothing to do with the day-to-day lives of citizens. The evidence is shown in how unique and different each state is. We must encourage people to get involved in local elections and take more interest in them than in the federal elections. Who's running our schools? Who's filling our libraries with books? Who's controlling the local city police? Who's on the city council? Who is the county commissioner? Who's on the county commissioner's court to represent us? And governing our local judicial system? Who is the DA? And who's going to enforce the law properly by prosecuting bad people instead of good people? These are things that we can control down at the community level if we want to do a better job. The Bible says that when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people mourn. The righteous are not supposed to be hiding under a bushel. They're to be out there taking dominion as Christ commanded in Matthew. Not lording over others as a tyrant in a theocracy, but providing the liberty that can only come from Christ. Christian nationalism is something the enemy has been starting rumors about to cause people to fear Christians, and to keep Christians in their place inside the church rather than out serving the community. The people they call Christian nationalists are simply those who want to return to the constitutional republic that made America great, keep the changes that made it better, and get rid of the things that have done our nation so much harm. This is a spiritual battle that begins with people of faith working together as a community to get candidates of strong moral character elected. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's for dinner. John Quincy Adams said, "The experience of all former ages has shown that of all human governments, democracy was the most unstable, fluctuating, and short-lived." Samuel Adams said, "It is in the interest of tyrants to reduce the people to ignorance and vice, for they cannot live in any country where virtue and knowledge prevail." Sam Adams also said, "If ever a time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." John Quincy Adams said, "The highest glory of the American Revolution was this: it connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity." Samuel Adams said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." The Constitution is under attack, and it is time to restore the power our Constitution once had so that we may take the power away from the federal government and give it back to the states where it belongs. We can use the Constitution to save the Constitution by invoking Article 5 and calling for a convention of states. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution gives states the power to call a convention to propose amendments. This was the only amendment our founding fathers made with no arguments. Everyone voted in the affirmative immediately upon its proposal because they knew it was the only way the states could ever get their power back if the federal government got out of control. No matter what happens in a convention of states, it cannot hurt the Constitution because it takes 38 states to ratify any amendments.
An organization known as Convention of States has been working toward calling for an Article 5 convention for over a decade. Each time they approach a state, they must have an identical application. Texas became the 11th state to pass the resolution known as SJR 2, applying for an Article 5 convention, which is limited to proposing amendments that will impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office of federal officials and members of Congress. Texas also passed SJR 38, which puts a sunset clause on our application that will cause it to expire in 2025 if we do not get a bill passed to extend the date. 19 states have passed the same application calling for an Article 5 convention in both legislative chambers. 7 states have passed it in one chamber, and 21 states are considering it for the next legislative
what do we
session.
do? We must learn to be strong biblical
allow the
citizens
Texas
and study the
application
biblical
to
and
expire.
historical roots of our founding, our Constitution, its original intent, and what made it last longer than any other Constitution in the history of the world. And then we need to teach that to our children. We can host American Campfire Revival classes and help people learn amazing stories about America's founding and the miracles that have gone before and the great awakenings that we've had, and what does it take to bring us back to God. Now that we've learned to be good biblical citizens, we've awakened and turned back to God and helped to spread the Campfire Revival, now we need to learn more depth about the Constitution itself.
In an election sermon on the day of the anniversary election on May 12th of 1803, Matthias Burnett, pastor of the First Church in Norwalk, said, "Finally, ye free men, all of every class, whose high prerogative it is to raise up or pull down, to invest with office and authority, or to withhold them, and in whose power it is to save or destroy your country, consider well the important trust and distinguishing privileges which God and nature have put into your hands. To God and posterity you are accountable for them. See that you preserve them inviolate and transmit them to posterity unimpaired. Let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which our fathers delivered to you as a sacred palladium, and which, by the blessing of God, have been peculiarly beneficial to the order, peace, and prosperity of this state, amid all the vicissitudes and convulsions of other states and kingdoms round. And that this happy state of things may continue, look well to the characters and qualifications of those you elect and raise to office and places of trust." John Quincy Adams was the son of our second president, who became our sixth president. When John Quincy Adams left the Oval Office, he was elected as a congressman and fought to end slavery for 17 years. Imagine going from president to a lowly congressman. They were so tired of hearing him talk about ending slavery that they passed a John Quincy Adams gag order. When asked by a reporter why he was fighting what seemed to be a losing battle for so long, he replied, "Duty is ours, results are God's." During those 17 years, he had a protege that walked by him for 1 2-year term as a congressman. They became such good friends that upon his death that young man was one of his pallbearers. 12 years later, that young man became the 16th President of the United States. His name was Abraham Lincoln. Our children, or the people we may inspire, need to complete what we began. Until the day we stand before God, we do what we can with our whole heart, for we will be held accountable for what we do or don't do as stewards over that which God has entrusted us with. Let us continue putting one foot in front of the other, doing that which God has called us to do in faith, and let God bring in the harvest, always remembering, duty is ours, results are God's.